Hello, everyone. Welcome to YOLO Ops, where we're going to talk about going fast, hopefully without breaking things, and how we as an industry can do a little bit better at that. So my name is Kiley Davidson. I'm an IT systems engineer. I think I'm the only IT systems engineer, actually, over at Elastic, based here in San Francisco. For another 2 weeks at least. We're also joined by Matthew Bodley, who is the Senior Minister of Information Technology at Domain Tools. And we're also joined by Nick Zlotko over at Leica, which is an animation studio up in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Nick.
Hello and welcome. Thank you.
Hey. So Helene was going to be with us today. Sadly, she could not make it because YOLO happened to her at the last minute, and it kind of prevented her from being able to participate in the panel, but she was super helpful with the prep of everything. So I did want to shout out, thank you very much, Helene, and I wish you could be with us, but good luck with everything happening at Stumptown right now. So speaking of YOLO, what is YOLO Ops? So if you're not hip with the memes, which is completely valid because we all have no time, YOLO is an abbreviation for you only live once, and it's kind of used in this slightly sardonic, impulsive, reckless way of just like, well, I know this is probably a bad idea, but YOLO, I'm going to do it anyhow. And it's kind of the joke with it was mostly young people doing stupid things, but let's be honest, it's IT. We do stupid things. And another way of looking at it is it's having this, especially in the IT circumstances, it's having to do something right now that under normal circumstances, right, you would take a bit more time and a bit more care to do. And so some of the warning signs that you're going to hear for when YOLO is starting to happen to you in the IT world, and apologies, some of these may be a little bit triggering, is just when someone walks up to you and is like, hey, can you just do this thing for me real quick? Or, you joke about how the fact that you don't always test your code, but when you do, it's in production. Or wait, we even have a test environment? Perhaps you've had the person sled up to your desk near the lunchroom before the afternoon meal, and it's just like, hey, quick question. And as soon as you hear those words, that this is going to be a situation that is not going to go as you expected it to, that it's going to take way longer than you expect it to take. And it's not going to go well. And there's that little alarm bell ringing in the back of your head that, ooh, this is going to hurt. But you keep going anyhow because we're IT people and we like to help. And this can take many, many different forms. It doesn't even necessarily start with a ticket or an issue. It could be not doing something planned well in advance that then tumbles into an oopsie. And we all have these stories, but in the spirit of commiseration and sharing, Matthew, Nick, and I are going to share very quickly about 3 minutes of just an example of when in our work career experience we've had one of these kind of YOLO oopsies happen to us, just to get your own brain jogging for the open panel part that we're going to do towards the end of this, so we can have a broader discussion as a community about YOLO ops and how to prevent it. So Matthew, let's have you go first with your story about vendors being dangerous liars and backing up.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh my gosh. So I was working with a vendor to produce a program that took last year's financial information, like the folders and just some of the file information, and duplicate it into next year so that we could hopefully automate some stuff for next year, and it would be a lot faster. And after a few rounds of back and forth, fixing the obvious errors, spelling mistakes, etc., I had something that was worth testing. I started the program and it completed very quickly. I was expecting it to take a few hours because there were several 100,000 lines that would be run through. But nope, it was done immediately. And instead of duplicating the folder structure into a new year, which was the goal, it had deleted an entire year of financial data and then proceed wild freaking out, like just running circles around for a minute. And then after I finished that round of freak out, I ended up talking to another system engineer on my team and asked where the backups were kept. I knew that there was a backup, I just didn't know where it was. The happy ending is after communicating with the finance team to not save anything in that folder for a little bit, I was able to restore the whole backup. It took about 4 hours to complete, and everything was great. Fast forward a few weeks from that, and I had a working program that duplicated folder structure for the finance team, so they were ready for the new fiscal year, right before the new fiscal year started. And the lesson here is always have a sandbox, and don't trust your vendors.
Never trust your vendors. Never ever. Nick, do you want to go next with your upgrade testing horror story?
Sure. So one thing that I'll talk about is not having a test environment set up correctly. So background tool is we have some pipeline tools in our system, and at the time they were updated by the network sync script, where it would actually run on the it would actually run from the network. So all the actual script was, on the network. So we didn't have a testing environment. So a update came along, and we upgraded all of our Mac environment, and the script actually stopped working, and we were trying to figure out why, because it actually ran from launch D. So launch D would kick it, but it would stop working. And it actually went into penalty box. So we're trying to figure out why. And I was trying to review our configurations, trying to figure out possibly why, what was going on. And I noticed that since it kept going into the penalty box, it kept giving different errors. One of the errors was a configuration problem. So trying to look at the man page of the launched.com plists, trying to figure out did we do it wrong? After that, noticed that it didn't, that we were kind of doing it right. So my last resort was trying to email the LaunchD development mailing list, and it had not been very active. It was kind of pretty much inactive. And but finally, I got word back from someone at Apple and said that LaunchD didn't check the network mounts before it actually executed the script, and that they weren't sure if the FS events were actually used for network mounts. So that kind of made it to us where we need to move that script off of the network mounts and move it into the local. So, but because the script was used for for all of our platforms, we needed to work around that. So this was stopping production out on stage. So you can tell that people were kind of breathing down our necks and trying to get us to fix this as soon as possible. So a senior engineer and I sat down, and what we did was we created a wrapper script to actually run the network script that ProdTech created. And so what this does is it actually checked to make sure that the mount was up. If it wasn't up, try to mount it, and would sleep in between. So that way LaunchD would run this script, and the script could fail, but not actual LaunchD, so it wouldn't be put in the penalty box. So with that, we finally got it working and then shipped it out as soon as possible. It's still in production. We kind of, with Catalina, we are now just starting to adjust that and fix it up. Yeah, so we've learned to do more testing and even dot releases, because I know that even more recently we've had a few issues with dot releases not showing up in testing. So especially with the current dot that ignore release with a mid production, it's going to be quite more time to not do YOLO ops.
Yeah, those upgrades get you, and it's not like Apple's ever released a buggy update or anything. No, not at all. So my story is a little bit different from these because it wasn't really a software problem. But in a job, former life, we had an on-site data center with a backup generator and backup and dedicated cooling. This was in the basement of this old Tudor style. It was actually an asylum at one point for tuberculosis people. People had tuberculosis rather. But anyhow, so one day we got to the point where we realized that we needed to upgrade our cooling. And because we needed to upgrade our cooling, we needed to upgrade our generator. And it was kind of one of those projects where it just spirals, where it's like, okay, well, we just need to upgrade the cooling. That's not going to be that big of a deal. We can stage it. And then, oh, wait, but these new coolers pull more power. So we're going to need to upgrade our backup power as well. And it's just kind of spiraled out of control and deeper and deeper. But we got it done eventually, right? Contractors came in, replaced our cooling. We got the generator upgraded. And we ran a test on everything. We tested the backup power. And it was a bit nerve-wracking during that test process, but it managed to work fine once we fixed a gremlin in the power transfer switch. And everything ran fine for like 10 or 20 minutes. And we're like, okay, cool, we're good. Backup works, no one noticed, everything's fine. This project is finally over, hallelujah, let's go home, it's Christmas. So we went home over Christmas break, which, about a month later, right? And over the Christmas holiday, I had left some stuff on my desk that I needed to pick up. So I drove into the office, and anyone who lives in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle knows that the wintertime windstorms can be quite severe. And so as I'm driving in, I noticed the power's out. It's fine, we have a generator. I then noticed that the car in front of me at an otherwise abandoned campus is my boss's car, which is odd. So we both drive up to the entrance to our building. We both get out of the cars and have the usual, like, wait, it's Christmas morning. What are you doing here? Well, I'm single and have no family. What are you doing here? And while the power is out, we started getting temperature alarms, my boss tells me. And that shouldn't be happening. I agree. So we opened the door into the basement where our cooling center is. And as we open it, the doorknob felt warm, and door opens, and we just got hit by this wall of heat. It was probably about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 35 degrees centigrade. And it was hot. It was very, very hot. So we go down in the basement, and it's like 120 degrees in the server room. We can't figure out why. The compressors are running, the air conditioners are on, the backup generator is running, but for some reason, hot air instead of cold air is blowing out of the vents into the server room, and it's cooking our servers. So we do a mad dash, start unplugging things, call maintenance, get fans, blow some cool air in, and after about 2 hours of work, we managed to get the server room down to 70 degrees. And in our postmortem, we're trying to figure out, well, what happened? Call the electrician, call the air conditioner technicians in, have them look at everything. And it turns out that when they wired up the compressors to the new backup generator, while they wired everything up to the AC mains properly, they accidentally wired the compressors up backwards to the generator. So when we were running on AC power, the air conditioners worked as normal, cold air went to the data center, hot air was exhausted to the atmosphere. But when the backup generator was running, it went in reverse. So instead of hot air getting vented to the atmosphere, the cold air was vented to the atmosphere, and the hot air was vented into the data center. It turned the data center into or turned the air conditioners into heaters. So the long story short of that is, if you've got backup power, always test your backup power, and don't just test it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? Like if you've got a UPS, right? Unplug it and let it sit. Let it sit for a while and see what happens, because oftentimes the numbers on the display saying your battery is going to last for 30 minutes, they're a total lie. And weird things happen and you don't expect it, but test for a long time. But how did this happen? How did Matthew's issue with vendors and a script running go too far? How did Nick's issue with a backup or a minor software upgrade bricking the entire production process of a major motion picture? How did that happen? And how do we prevent this, right? Only we can prevent forest fires, but how do we actually do that? And Nick, Matt, Helena, and I had a conversation kind of before this as kind of a Kickstarter for the community discussion. We came up with a couple of ideas that we can discuss more in panel. But the first one that we came up with is just stop it. People are always going to come up to you with hey, could you just do this real quick? Or, hey, we were saying that the project was just going to be this, but it actually looks like it's going to be this big thing. And there's something to be said for, within IT, we all kind of agree that there's a spirit of wanting to help and wanting to be seen as helpful, but we can take that too far. And sometimes you need to say, look, this is beyond the scope of what we were promised. We need to recalculate. We need to slow down. We need to rethink things. Or, hey, I'd love to help you with this problem, but I need you to put a ticket in, and it needs to go into the queue because this is actually sounding like it's going to be a lot bigger than just me clicking a box or two. Sometimes we have to say wait or stop or slow down just to prevent the fire from getting bigger than we expected to as a surprise. But the other thing too is we need to make vendors do the right thing. We've all hopefully seen SSO.tax, the wonderful website that tells you about all of the vendors that charge you extra for doing SAML, which is the right way to do authentication. Vendors will oftentimes set their systems up in ways that make doing proper testing impossible. Either you don't get a sandbox environment, or you get a sandbox environment, but it doesn't actually have a way for you to properly do an A/B test before you roll into production, or there's no way to roll from the sandbox into production. There are lots of ways that this can look, but vendors often make this time worse because, frankly, they're going to get their money anyhow. And so there's something to be said for those of us, especially who work for bigger companies that have a bit more leverage in their contract renewals, to start pushing vendors to, like, hey, sandboxes should be standard. Hey, it should be a normal feature for us to be able to deploy code from the sandbox into production without having to do a bunch of crazy stuff. Or like, hey, you know, it'd be great if I could do a versioning of my code for Jamf without having to do some janky weird things with the API and Git, as amazing as that can be. We need to pressure vendors as a community to do the right thing. And that gets into this idea of solidarity. And solidarity really goes two ways. One, for those of us who are more senior in the IT field, who've been doing this for a long time, keeping our antenna up, looking around the community, talking to other people. And when we see stuff that kind of sets off red flags in our head, say something and call it out. I know that myself, when I was earlier in the IT career that I have now, like, there are many instances where I walked into a nightmare of a fire simply because I didn't know any better. But if I'd had a mentor who was kind of like, hey, you're talking about this thing that's happening at work over on, you know, the Women of Technology channel in Slack, on the MacAdmin Slack, and this doesn't sound right. What's going on here? Is everything okay? Like, reaching out and offering that support can be such a huge way to both bring up people in the community, but also prevent these fires for other people around you. But there's also something to be said for the other form of solidarity, which is making yourself available and vulnerable to actually sharing these things with the community when stuff goes wrong, or when you're not sure if this is right or not, and you don't want to speak up because you might be scared of ridicule, or you might be scared of being called out for things. But opening yourself up to that feedback and that input from the community can be a very powerful, transformative experience. And it's something that, at least personally, I think we don't necessarily always do very well in the Mac DevOps community, but that we can do a lot better, and it could be amazingly transformative. And the last thing we'll mention here is doing HugOps well before we transition to panel. So, you know, the joke is that YOLO ops leads to HugOps, and HugOps is where at Elastic we have this idea of there's always someone on call for something, right? And when everything hits the fan for them, I'm not on call, so my job isn't to fix the problem necessarily. But it is my job as a member of the company and as just a decent human being to be like, hey, this is a really terrible time for you, and I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, and I can't help because it's out of my experience or it's out of my hands, but can I help? Is there anything that you need? Can I take something off your plate for you? Do you need a hug? And just being there as a community to support people who are going through a rough time, just because, you know, burnout often can make it feel like, especially that, like, you know, the end's never going to come. And so you need those other people to surround you to be like, hey, it's gonna get better. And if it's not getting better because your job is terrible and your manager is a horrible human being, the community is here to support you to find a better role. The jobs channel of MacAdmin Slack is amazing. So with that being said, we're gonna transition to panel time. So I know that there's some magic that needs to happen on the stream for that to occur. And Matt, Nick, I know you're still with me, I hope. And as we transition to this, those of you who are watching on the stream, there is a YOLO Ops channel that you can pop some chat stuff into, and I think Matt's been checking back and forth that. And you can also pop into the speaker Q&A channel to ask us questions orally, and let's chat. We've got 10 minutes here. Yeah, so I'm going to join into that voice channel actually right now on my amazing, powerful. Cool. Let me stop sharing my screen here. Great. Sweet. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. Okay. So we're in the speaker Q&A channel. Fantastic. This is a new experience for all of us. Hello, everyone in the speaker Q&A channel. I hope you can hear me. Any questions or thoughts for the panel? Matt, Nick, anything that you want to kind of start with?
I will say that being able to work, especially working with someone, when you have someone ask you to do something really quick, always pairing with someone, I find helps solve a lot of the miscues that YOLO ops can have. Being able to bounce ideas off of someone really quick and just work with them. I feel like that's helped me and currently with a lot of the walk-ups that we have with production.
Not doing things at Friday 4 p.m. alone in the office has probably been one of the things that saved me over the last couple of years. Because yeah, you want to get that one more thing done before you hit the eject button for the week, but it probably can wait. Actually, it can.
That makes me think of there's the idea of, I think it's No Change Thursday or No Change Friday. One of those two hashtags that I've seen occasionally, which is this idea that like it's the end of the week and we're not making any changes on, or it was like this one was that Tableau, actually, we called it No Change Friday, where you did all of your production code changes on Thursday. Friday was the stuff has hit the fan, let's clean up day. And if that wasn't the case, it was an amazing day then of relative quiet to catch up on emails, catch up on tickets, take care of the little things, but you weren't doing any of these big major production changes that could break anything because the idea was that that provided a day of insulation to save your weekend because otherwise, well, you wouldn't have a weekend. But yeah, I think it's really easy for us to like, especially in IT, those of us who are very like empathetic and service oriented, we really, really want to like fix everything fast. And it's super easy, especially if you're working from home. I feel like that's a particular thing that happens right now of like, hey, I could do work at 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to go do that. I could play and do video games or relax or do something, but I'm just going to get this one little thing done instead. And it leads to burnout so fast because you don't have that break between work and life. And it's the same when you're working in an office of like 14-hour days are not sustainable. And sometimes that's that solidarity thing, right? Of like, hey, you're working a lot. You're on Slack really late. I looked at your time zone. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. Why are you awake? Is everything okay? Yeah.
One thing about that read only Fridays and stuff is that we also have a change. Even Monday through Thursday, we have a 10 o'clock a.m. change, like a change email that goes out. So no changes before then, and we have to give it to a senior member or the lead. And he sends out that email to IT that says like, this is the changes for today. And you usually try to keep it in a certain window. We're a little smaller company, so it's a little bit easier to keep it to lunch or after hours. But that's one thing that we've experienced is to save a lot of the one-off quick changes. Is look, if you're going to make something that's going to affect production, make sure that you have, that it goes out. And so that way people in production know that something will happen that might affect them. And then having a key person to relay those, I think helps a lot as well.
Bets makes this great joke in the YOLO Ops channel about resume generating events, as he likes to call them. But Nitrain had this great story too about having a librarian upgrading a database schema the last day before his vacation. This is a big thing, I think, and I've seen this a lot. And I admit I've done it myself once or twice when I was young and inexperienced, where it's like, hey, your last 3 or 4 days before vacation, you're not changing anything. You're just responding to emails and closing tickets. Because once you're out of, it's about boundaries, right? Once you're on vacation, no one should be talking to you. You should be relaxing. And you shouldn't be creating situations, solidarity, for other people where they need to call you. And I think particularly in the American work context, we tend to never really go on vacation, even when we go on vacation. And there are lots of different, compounding reasons for that. But don't force people into a situation where they need to contact you on vacation either, I think is a big one, which requires, again, planning ahead and thinking ahead and thinking through the consequences of what you're going to do. My phone locked.
Some
so
of
I
this
can't
we
see
bring on
questions the
ourselves
chat.
also because we end up, especially if we're in really small organizations, this like duopoly of we need to do everything right now. But again, back to just stop. We don't have to do it all right now.
Yes. So someone just
was
asked a
around
question
Discord.
about if there was no, have we been in a job where there was no test environment? Has anyone, have you, either of you two,
Yes,
been in that environment?
Yeah, and it's
yes.
hard.
The switching
ahead, Matt.
from like like for instance, Jamf makes it super easy to push something to select all right now, and slowing down from that to be like, okay, how do I determine what testing actually needs to be done, and then exactly,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and being able to do that, that's really you have to make time for that. That's time that you're not going to be able to be given that time. You have to make the time for that. And then also communicate that to people and say, hey, before we roll this update or before I give you this cool new thing, we're going to push it out to like a few people, or we're going to do it during this hour. And then if there's any problems, there's going to be a rollback or something like that. But that's actually been the majority of places I've been at haven't had a huge test environment, and I've been able to help set up those test environments.
And it really does come down to communication, especially with management, of like, this is going to save us in the future if we do this right. And you have to make that clear and you have to push on it. And honestly, if you're working at a place where you're constantly getting pushback about doing the right thing, like that's something to be said for, do you need to be looking for a different place? There's a privilege and a luxury there of being able to have that conversation with yourself and being able to act on it. But at the same time, you want to work somewhere where you're supported. And if you're not being supported, then get out, because it's only going to get worse. That's my take on that, at least. I'm seeing a question here in the chat as well. What strategies from Piero, what strategies have you successfully used to say, just stop asking me to YOLO and staying service-oriented at the same time? On that, at least at Elastic, one of the big things that we have gotten really, really good at is like, hey, we need a ticket for this. Everything requires a ticket. And we don't do it in a militaristic way of like, you know, you don't even talk to me, go open a ticket. But in a like, hey, that sounds like a really difficult problem. And that's actually pretty serious. So it's high priority. But while I start to work on this, I need you to go and open a ticket for me in the repo so we can track it, right? And just so we know what the workload looks like and we can identify problems. And you give them some reasons why, so it's not just pointless paperwork, but you track everything as a ticket, because that gets people into the habit of opening those tickets. And then over time, you're able to start to identify those trends that you see of, well, this is breaking a lot, so I'm gonna go fix it so it doesn't keep breaking. But also it gets people in the habit of like, hey, I want to talk to IT, I'm just gonna go open a ticket because they're gonna ask me to do it anyhow. And that helps you prioritize that, build it into the culture.
Yep.
But you have to be consistent.
And that ends our time. So Matt is going to do some end of the day. It was nice talking with you guys on the panel. I'm glad that everyone on the panel was able to attend, and we will be available on Discord. And so Matt is ready to take over. Have a good day.